All right, so picture this. You have just splurged and spent $300 on a new outfit and pair of shoes. If you would never do that, just go with me anyway. All right, that evening, you've bought this outfit for a special event you're going to, and that evening, while driving to the event, you look off in the distance, and in a lake, you see a child drowning. No one else is around to help. What do? So, you can rush into the muddy and mucky water, thus saving the child, but ruining your $300 outfit and shoes, or you can stand by and watch the child drown, but you have just saved your new purchase. What do? Well, of course, anyone with any ounce of compassion would rush into the lake, their just clothes, and you would save the child's life. They would recognize that life is more important than $300. Of course it is, in every single way. Easy decision, right? Well, the truth is that as human beings, you and I often struggle to make similar, albeit less dramatic, ethical decisions when it comes to prioritizing the things that are most important in life, even when it comes to helping or not helping a fellow human being. So you and I have to make choices every day, every single minute. Many of these decisions have to do with how we spend and give our money. So this morning, I'd like to offer myself up, or perhaps better said, throw myself under the bus, with how I spend and give my money and what it says about my priorities, what I prioritize in life. As I share, you may find yourself wanting to let me off the hook. Don't. I am not asking you to do that. What I am asking you, however, is through what I'm sharing, that you would reflect upon your own life in the way that you spend and give your money, and ask yourself the question, am I putting first things first? Is my spending and giving reflecting what is most important to me and to the world? And try your best not to get defensive, because as I was putting this all together, I'm starting to beat myself up a little bit, and I think, well, that's not helpful. So receive this, I hopefully, in some way that finds itself into your heart. All right, here we go. I have a dog named Sunny. Sweetest, massive ball of fur you have ever met. Literally, we have West Texas tumbleweeds of hair blowing around the house. As you probably well know, it costs money to have a pet. I actually got Sunny for the bargain basement price of $11 from the Austin Animal Center, from where I rescued her. That, however, was not even a taste of the actual expenses to come over the last 5 years. So here is how much I have spent on Sunny on average per year. $600, give or take, on food. $600 on some, of course, unexpected treatment like an ear infection or a rash or whatever. $250 on flea, tick, and heartworm meds, and $150, give or take, for an annual checkup. So the price of Sunny disposition, priceless. The actual cost of Sunny per year, $1,600. Now, that does not include any of those many one-time costs, such as when Sunny chose to chew up the dining room tables, plural, and coffee table, and, most famously, enjoyed a friend's PlayStation for breakfast one morning. Because, you know, if Sunny had a middle finger, she would use it. Now, let me tell you, in contrast, how much I spent on giving to the poor and those experiencing homelessness last year. $360 to help a young man that I know in Guatemala continue his education. $240 to help a good friend of mine who's a single mom in Guatemala so she can stay home with her kiddo. $150, I'm ballparking some of these, to various hunger-related charities in town. And then maybe $10 a month for individuals for gas or groceries or whatever it may be. That is a grand total of $870 spent on the poor, houseless, and hungry. Based on these two figures, $1,600 versus $870, would it be fair to say that I care almost twice as much about a pet as I do about the poor? Don't let me off the hook. That's a helpful question for me. Maybe it is not a helpful question at all for you. Maybe it seems too black and white, and we can go on and on. Yes, there are certain expenses. I love my pet, of course. But this is one that has challenged me, that is making me think about my priorities. Okay, so if I ask that same question to other Americans, how do you think they would answer? All right, so in 2022, last year, Americans spent a grand total of $136.8 billion on our pets. That is more than the GDP of the 40 poorest nations on earth combined. That does come out to about $1,500 per dog owner, so mine was about the same, and $900 per cat owner, further confirming that dogs are more valuable than cats. Last Valentine's Day alone, we spent $800 million on costumes and special treats for our pets. All right, here's the cold bath. In contrast, Americans gave $50 billion to food banks, pantries, homeless shelters, children and family services, crisis services, homeless services, and support for the elderly and disabled. So around 36% of what we gave for our pets. As an aside, we spend $6 billion a year on ice cream and upwards into $30 billion on pizza. So, the take home, based on our spending in America, our pets and love for creamy desserts matter far much more to us than our combined giving for education, health, the environment, the hungry, the homeless, and the poor. You don't even want to get me into how much we spend on coffee. The average American, not just Starbucks fan, spends $1,100 a year on just Starbucks. All right, despite what may seem like evidence to the contrary, this is not a sermon about guilt or beating ourselves up, and I am an awful human, I am so selfish, I've chosen a dog over a suffering human being. None of that is helpful. We just leave here, it doesn't really change us. So, I think I'd like to direct this primarily to a shift in thinking. What are our priorities, and can we shift them to use our God-given financial resources to reflect what we value most in life? And I am hopeful, in fact, that we will all leave this place not guilt-ridden, but encouraged, because I believe that since we are created in the image and likeness of God, that you and I are, by nature, compassionate and giving people. And this has been evidence in this congregation. When we see a need, we give, and we give generously. And when we are confronted with a human being in need, we respond. It's just that every now and then we forget, and we need to be reminded of what's most important and what God has given us, and how can we use it for the benefit of the world. And I believe Jesus is just the one to remind us. Okay, you may have heard it said, show me your credit card statement, and I'll show you what you value most in life. Well, Jesus said it first, and said it like this: where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. beautiful, powerful verse, I see a couple central teachings here. One is Jesus is asking us, what's your priority in life? What is the most important thing to you? That is your treasure. And who or what do you put your trust in? That is where your heart is. So let me first ask you, what is your treasure? I undoubtedly think everyone here would be like, my loved ones, a friend of mine, my grandchildren, my children, all these things that are beautiful to us. However, does your spending and giving invest in things that are beyond that are eternal and not what we would call earthly? Earthly this, earthly ice cream, earthly coffee, all of these things. Jesus said, don't hoard treasure down here where it gets eaten by moths or vermin or is corroded by rust or worse, is stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven where it's safe from moth and rust and vermin and burglars. So these would not have just been throwaway abstract words for the people Jesus was talking to that day. It's not like they had a closet full of clothes. No. So to say something about moths, which were a serious problem, and if your 2 or 3 articles of clothing were destroyed, that was significant. And if your tools were rusted to pieces or rats ate up all your grain, you could starve. This is a big deal. You and I, although moths, as far as I know, except for my grandparents' closet with those mothballs, are no longer really a problem, or rats most of the time eating up our food or whatever it may be. We stockpile things that will be taken from us, so to speak, because one day we will die. So the question Jesus presents us with is, what is your true treasure beyond these things? Recognizing that we cannot drive a U-Haul into heaven or have storage containers with us beyond the pearly gates, how can we use our treasure to make eternal investments that cannot be threatened by moth or rust or vermin or thieves? Some of us in America have learned this better than others. Guess who the second most generous givers in terms of income in terms of percentage of income are in the United States? It is those who make less than $50,000 a year. The second most generous givers in America. They are second only to those who are in the top 1%, which God bless their huge giving, but 10% of countless millions doesn't seem to sting as much as 5 to 6% does of $50,000. Guess who gives the least money? Those making between $100,000 and $500,000. And I would speculate that there are some here that fall into that category. We are the least generous. That was pretty eye-opening for me. How can that be? Jesus teaches, it's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. So I'll just say it bluntly. Those of us in this least generous bracket of Americans are, in many ways, making poor investments. It is all God's money, and I think that's the biggest step one. Everything I've got is God's money. God is letting me steward it, use it. Yet I have, in many ways, chosen to store up earthly possessions instead of really investing heavily in eternal things. So imagine for a moment this shockingly countercultural exchange. Can you imagine this in any world? Me. I'm investing in art and real estate so I can really grow my wealth. My friend. Oh, cool. I've decided to start investing really heavily in forgiveness and generosity. I found that kindness and compassion are never affected by the stock market, and they are just increasing exponentially. Can you, in any universe, And maybe the person does sound a little self-righteous. But can you imagine that conversation? And if not, why not? Of course, making earthly investments is good and smart and wise. I think we can all agree on that, especially when it allows us to be more generous and give to those in need and to our family and all that. That is all good. But as followers of Jesus, we are always challenged and invited to invest money and time in things that are also eternal. Remember, nothing lasts forever except that which we do and give for others. Nothing is eternal except that which we do and give for others. The way Jesus talks about it is opening our eyes. It's a matter of choosing to see people's needs or not. Jesus refers to our eyes as windows into our conscience. So we can have healthy eyes, ones where the blinds are fully open and drawn, and we see the world's needs and everything around us. We can also have unhealthy eyes, eyes that are squinted, and the blinds are totally drawn. Maybe we don't want to see what is out there. As you decide how to spend and give your money, are the blinds on your eyes, on your moral conscience, fully drawn? Or do you intentionally squint your eyes through life to ensure that you don't see all of the needs around us? Well, Jesus invites us to fix our attention on God, who is always most present in the least of these. To have our eyes wide open in order that light would shine from our eyes into the darkest of places. Ultimately, to me, I think our spending and giving is a matter of trust. Why are America's poor more generous than most of the rest of us? I think it's because they have learned to trust God in a way that many of us have not. In many ways, they've been required or needed or forced to trust God, and that's been a beautiful thing. Jesus knew that as humans, we'll worry about so many things, our clothes and what we eat and what we wear and about having enough. But he says, your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things, but seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you as well. Do you trust those words? That for those of us, that God will provide. People often say that as a cliche or throwaway, but do you believe that God will provide enough? In other words, we all have enough. How can we stop operating out of fear and scarcity? Oh gosh, but if I give this, I won't have enough for that. But the whole invitation is that God will provide, and therefore we respond out of that. But we say, well, gosh, it's obvious some do not have enough. God has not provided for them. How does God provide for them? Through us. How is the whole world provided for? Through us. Jesus told his disciples, and this is the big take home for me that I hope will stick with each of you. To whom much is given, much is required. I can't speak for any of you here, but I've been given much. The whole purpose is blessed to be a blessing. And generosity, I do believe, is one of the clearest signs of our faith. So how we each respond to this will be different, but perhaps consider this. What would it look like to just go home? What has God put in your heart? The environment. Oh my gosh, we've got to do something. Gun violence, do something about that. Oh my gosh, I see houseless people on every street here in Austin, or the education system. Teachers desperately need our help. Whatever it is in our city and beyond, go online and set up some form of recurring donation. And that way, it's just out there into the world. And I believe that is what it looks like to stockpile treasures in heaven. Or maybe say, I'm going to take one less hour scrolling through my phone, and instead I'm going to go to the Austin Food Bank, and I'm going to donate my time. Stockpiling treasures in heaven. This is not about legalism or anything like that. It is just, what is the overflow of my heart? And so my hope and prayer is that we would get to the point where we don't see those things as sacrifices, but we're like, I am investing my money and time so well. This is like an incredible eternal investment. And I do believe that we were created this way, good and generous by nature. The only invitation is, now let's show it. Amen. Let me share